Ambassador Anil Trigunyat at this point. Sir, do you share Colonel Shivdan Singh's assessment that, the two ministers may be meeting here in the national capital today? This may be the Chinese defense minister's first visit to India since Galwan, but let's keep our expectations low. Of course, he says that the boundary dispute should be resolved. Now, that is something that has bedeviled ties between the two countries for decades now. That's not going to be resolved overnight. But given some of the recent thorny issues that we've seen, especially since Galwan, what are your expectations from today's meeting? Do you see anything changing? Just for the benefit of our viewers, I want to quickly recall what India's Foreign Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, said when he met his Chinese counterpart, Qin Gang, on the sidelines of a G20 meeting in Delhi in the month of March this year. Jaishankar told Qin the state of India-China relations was abnormal. The question really is, sir, is it going to assume any kind of normalcy anytime in the foreseeable future?
Well, Neha, I broadly believe in and endorse what Colonel Singh said now. Our relationship with China has been with mostly the last 50, 45 years has been that of competition with cooperation. And the conflict really was missing from there, but now the third C has been added to it. And we have seen that despite the 18, 19 meetings that have happened, everything is yet to be resolved. And of course, the biggest problem is the demarcation of the borders and the acceptance of the line. But lines of actual control was agreed to under various agreements that have been signed. The problem is that China refuses to respect those agreements. And this is what also the Foreign Minister of India, Dr. Jaishankar, has several times told that is why the relationship is abnormal. And personally, I feel that China is your biggest neighbor. It is not going anywhere. It is 5-6 times your economy. You don't want a war with them. They don't want a war with us because that will take both the countries behind. But till the confidence building measures between the two countries are reintroduced, and practical measures are taken on both sides to de-escalate it, I don't see that there is going to be any major change. This visit is taking place in the context of SCO summit, where all the defense ministers are meeting and where China has tremendous stakes, especially as the global world order is changing very fast. But we have Mr. Rajnath Singh has had meetings in Moscow with his defense counterpart at the same time when we had the external affairs ministers also went there to meet his counterpart. So the meetings keep on happening. There are assurances that are given. The reiteration that the status quo before the Galwan must be achieved. The military generals, both sides are talking to each other. And we have different mechanisms to de-escalate the tension. But it looks to me that at the moment, nobody wants in escalation. So the effort is through diplomacy to de-escalate the situation to the extent possible. But given the Chinese ilk, I don't see any great change happening.
It is understandable. Everyone is so skeptical about the Chinese because their track record vis-a-vis India in particular does not inspire any confidence. It is marked by betrayals, deception and treachery all the way. Dr. Kondapalli, let me come to you now. Even though there have been repeated provocations by China, there have also been some mixed signals. For example, in March this year, China's charge d'affaires, Ma Jia, had told some members of the media, and I'm quoting her, China and India are not threats to each other, but an opportunity for each other's development. They should be cooperation partners to each other instead of being competitive rivals. Some saw that as a bit of a conciliatory gesture. And then in the month of April, you have China making yet another provocation by seeking to give Chinese names to 11 places in Arunachal Pradesh, an Indian state that China lays claim to. So there is no end to the provocations. If anything, there have been mixed signals emanating from Beijing. So the question really is, can we expect anything from these meetings that are taking place, whether between Dr. Jaishankar and his Chinese counterpart or today between Rajnath Singh and his Chinese counterpart?
Two, three things here. One is the visit by the Chinese defense minister. This is part of the SCO defense ministerial meeting. It is not a bilateral meeting. It is a multilateral meeting. Of course, they were utilizing the visit for also raising the bilateral issues. That happens in any
So I'm sorry
multilateral
to
meeting.
interrupt you, but correct me if I'm wrong. You're absolutely right. The Chinese defense minister is here to attend a multilateral event. But as far as I know, these talks that are currently taking place as we speak are of a bilateral nature between Rajnath Singh and the Chinese defense minister.
That's right. But the focus is on the multilateral, not on the bilateral. So this will not result in a joint statement, which is kind of binding on each side. So this is not a bilateral. The priority for this visit is not bilateral. I just want to clarify, this is a multilateral meeting in which bilateral issues are not discussed in the multilateral forum. But today it is bilateral meeting. And so they will have some discussions, but the discussions will not become a concrete progress for the future India-China related matters on border issues or other defense related issues. I think that clarification is necessary. Uh, Number one. Number two is, as part of the multilateral, we were discussing counter-terrorism, we are discussing issues related to regional security and energy security and so on and so forth. So that is part of the multilateral from tomorrow onwards. So this clarification is necessary because it would be not wise to expect some kind of a breakthrough in the today's bilateral meeting because that is marginal. The focus is on the multilateral. So let me reiterate that position once again, number one. Number two, you mentioned about whether the Chinese would abide by the discussions and the agreements, etc. In February 2021, the two defense ministerial officials came to an understanding on disengagement, de-escalation in all friction points. The friction points are between Petrol Point 10 to Petrol Point 17 in the eastern Ladakh Aksai Chin region. And so this has to be de-escalated, disengaged. We have had the 18th round of discussions a day before, and no progress was made because there was no joint statement. There is no follow-up that has been announced on the results of this 18th Corps Commander level meeting. So the concern is what Dr. Jaishankar mentioned on June 17, 2020, where he said, unless until peace and tranquility prevails on the border, we will not have bilateral relations improvement. So today's meeting is bilateral. Don't expect any improvement because the line we follow is unless until peace and tranquility prevails on the border, there won't be any bilateral relations improvement. That is what we have been following from June 17, 2020. I want to also clarify this, that we have not had peace and tranquility. Let me rattle a few figures here. China had mobilized 70,000 troops in opposite to Ladakh. We, of course, mobilized 120,000 troops. We also mobilized 11 divisions. That's about roughly about 120,000 troops across the other sectors of the line of actual control. So basically we mobilized, we are now almost eyeball to eyeball, which means that there is no peace and tranquility on the border. You mentioned about the Tawang incident in December. That is also indicator that there is no peace and tranquility. So essentially what we are discussing is to douse these local level frictions and that project has not yet been completed. So forget about other bilateral relations today or in future because we have had, as you mentioned, the visit by the Foreign Minister Chin Kang for the G20 meeting. And there was a half an hour or so discussion between the two foreign ministers. That again is not a bilateral meeting with consequence. It is also about the multilateral G20 meeting. So let me just summarize this by saying that we have no bilateral relations since the Galwan incident.